It is Father Moo here. Nice to see you all. It's okay. Stop cheering. Stop cheering and throwing women's underwear onto the stage. We already have enough women's underwear on the stage. Seriously though. Hi everybody. It's Moo here, doing what I do, being Father Moo. As you know, it's Sunday morning and we got to get to this in the church. So let's dive right into something new, something new, something always newer than new. Okay. New is a word I start with a lot. The good thing about a modular is, especially a hardware one, is that unless you leave the cables plugged in overnight, you probably are going to start from scratch every time you start. And of course, you know, with a digital one or your VCV that I know all you kids out there love, yes, you can start from a template. Like, for example, you could not always make a mixer and two outputs every time like I start with. But I don't really recommend that. I think it's great practice to start from a blank page as writers or artists themselves often have to do. So that's one reason I try to keep starting from scratch every time I build a patch here. But I should talk about what I'm going to do before the point I was trying to make was newness is good. It's not the be-all and end-all. And having synths with presets on them is also fine. Nobody cares. But, I mean, I also don't think you should swing the other way and say, oh, I only use presets and then I tweak them 5%. I don't think you should only do either of those things. I think you should do both. But it's a good discipline with the modular to always be making something new. So I want to talk about that today in terms of copying or learning from others and then pushing that in a new direction. Have I given away the hint yet? Look at these three bad boys here. What am I going to do today? I am going to emulate the Minimoog. That's right. Minimoog, I don't care how you pronounce it. Don't write me letters because I don't know how to read. Let's look at what we got here. Let's leave this section for a second and start here. This is where the sound begins. We got three oscillators, 1, 2, 3. They have selectable waveforms, although I think in a Moog you don't click from one to the other, but you can slide between them, which is cool, but on the Nord modular we can't do it. Same here and same here. And as you can see, they can be set to a range which includes low, which we'll talk about a little later. Those three oscillators, assuming they're not in low mode, feed into a volume mixer. The volume mixer is also being fed an amount of noise, which has white or pink, and an external input. All these are things we can do on the Nord quite easily. Here's an overload knob. We probably won't get too into that one today. And then we have the filters. Although I always talk about AD versus ADSR, the Moog has one knob for, I believe, decay time and release time. I think this knob does double duty. So it's really like A, D, S, R, and D must equal R. And you can choose to send one of these filters to one of these envelopes to filter modulation, or the other to filter modulation, or one to volume and one somewhere else. I think I maybe have explained that incorrectly. These three here are an ADSR, and these three at the bottom they call loudness are an ADSR assigned to the volume or the overall voice. And then up here at the top of the filter box, they have the cutoff frequency, what they call emphasis. We usually call this resonance nowadays, and amount of contour. I assume that probably has something to do with filter modulation. And then we have a volume for the outputs, and a little tuner here, because in the analog days you had to retune once in a while. So, yeah, it doesn't look like rocket science, does it? It looks quite similar in many ways to the Korg Volca that we emulated here before. Because I only have so much horizontal space, I'm going to have to stack up here. So, oops, I almost made a 3-input mixer, but I'm going to need more than that. I'll take 8 at this point, because I'm going to need the 3 oscillators feeding in. Now with 3 of them, the volume is already going to be high, so I'm going to take advantage. Oh, you can see this already here, freaking out. Yellow means he's getting close to clipping. So I'm going to hit the 6 decibel down reducer. And then there's also, I guess I could put the noise one here. And I'll just, while we're at it, I'll just put the in out here, audio in. So the Korg Monotribe had an input option, and it of course had a noise option. I forget where it went in the mixer control, but I'll just take one channel. We'll pretend it's a mono input. Again, we have to pretend today because we don't have anything hooked up to it. And all these are going into the mixer. After the mixer, there will be the filter, and the one here they call, let's turn off the red cables. Classic low-pass filter is a Moog-style filter. Let's leave it on 24. That's a distinctive sort of sound. And I just patched a red cable there. And because it's the closest thing I have, I'm going to use ADSR envelopes. Again, the Minimoog is a little quirky in this area, but it's close enough for our purposes. And finally, we go to our output mixer. This one doesn't really exist on the Minimoog. Don't worry about it for now. So the main function of that second envelope would be to mess with the filter to allow the filter to open and close at slightly different settings. Let's just set them to random different settings than the standard voice, and therefore get effects which are similar to trumpet, trombone, and other real-world instruments, even though the final result won't be very real-worldy. Of course, we need to trigger the gates. In the Minimoog, there would be a keyboard, but Minimoogs could be connected to sequencers. And, of course, in the modern versions, they would have MIDI sequencers, or you could just send a computer's MIDI out, maybe through USB. So we'll just emulate that today with this. Doesn't that sound like a Minimoog? I'm just being silly. It doesn't sound anything like it. I'm going to have to arrange these and use sync into the reset inputs. And I'm going to put this one into the same pitch input as all 3 oscillators. So at this point you might be saying, wait a minute, hold on a cotton picking second. Why are the 3 oscillators all receiving the same pitch information? Won't they just play the same darn thing? And the answer is, you're right. So a lot of the power and the strength, the legendary sort of tone of the Minimoog came from detuning these oscillators from each other. So one of the ways to do that would be to send one an octave up and one an octave down, and then to set those to different types. So our top octave, make him a sawtooth. The middle one will make him a square. We'll be using that later. And the third one will make him a triangle. Let's just go back to the picture. You can see it's a sawtooth here. It's a bent sawtooth there. And it's becoming pulse width versions over here. So they don't actually have or I guess this is a triangle here now that I think about it. So yeah, sorry. Triangle through to saw through to square. So it really has 3 types, but not sine, because I guess Bob didn't think it was too musically useful. open things up a bit here. Sync up the sequencers. There we go. Give it a little more volume here and punch it up for you. Filter is getting swept now. You can also hear the noise clearly in the mix. Let's dial that down a little bit. Kind of an annoying sequence. Risky, but it didn't pay off for me. I guess I'm hearing the one in a different place than I should. Okay, that'll do it for a Moog sequence for now, I think. Let's listen to the different oscillators separately here. This is what we have at the top. So the envelope sweeping the filter is fine. A more classic approach might be to do this, to send it an LFO. Now, I think some of you already know, in the original Minimoog, if you wanted an LFO, you had to take this guy out of the audio circuit and then set him on a low frequency and use him to modulate someone else. Well, today I'm just not going to do that because I don't want to. Because I have more options here with the Nord Modular. So I'm going to make my own LFO, and I'm going to feed it to the filter. A lot of people who are like testing out a new synth, especially a new filter, would create a setup kind of like what we've got here, where the filter is being swept slowly over time, so they can hear how it sounds. It's getting a little bit too quiet at the bottom. I'm going to take the envelope out for now. See, when it gets to the bottom half of the cycle, it's almost inaudible. Although we are listening to the highest pitch oscillator. So why don't we dial in the second one now? Good. Now we're getting more of a punchy or beefy Minimoog tone. Time for the third guy. To my ears, that's better, and I like what the LFO is doing. I'm going to take the same LFO and assign it... No, you know what? I'm going to take another LFO. Why? Because I can. Hint, this is part of today's second LFO now modulating the pulse width of the square wave. And suddenly there's a lot of motion. Listen to that. That's a good sound. Look closely here. I've turned off the blue cables, but you can see the speeds are clearly different. The LFO that modulates the filter is slower than the LFO that modulates the pulse width. If I'd set them both to the same thing, I don't think there'd be as much interplay or variation in the sound, but by having them run at two different rates and modulating things that way, I think is better. That's just my opinion. We got the sound. I don't want to ruin it, but I do want to demonstrate another Minimoog typical sound. Instead of tuning them an octave apart, let's send them back to unison. So now they're perfectly in tune with each other, these three different waves. The filter is still being swept. Another thing we would often do on a Minimoog is detune them from each other. So this one is 20 centi whatever's up, and this is 20 down. So the overall pitch will still be in tune, but you'll get a much more interesting sound. And I had them as three different waves for a reason, but what if I take yet another LFO and I choose to patch this to here and this to here. So I have three LFOs controlling three pulse width modulations, and then I'm going to set them all to square wave. It's another powerful, or I would say dynamic sound. They're all square waves, but by being swept at different speeds by different LFOs, they're coming up with different outputs, different rates, so they're just not in sync with each other. Especially in a digital synth, they would be almost perfectly lined up, but this way is a lot more just musically flexible, I guess. Let's experiment with the filter type. Because this is the key of what I wanted to talk about today. Step one in emulating synths may be to learn how they work or learn how the different sounds interact. I'm going to go back to my original sound because I liked it better. Well, this one's still good. The next thing that you learn, and the next thing that I would encourage people to do is break it, modify it. Having three LFOs is not something that a Minimoog would have. Maybe if you got the Voyager XL in the early 2000s, you could do something like that, or you could send it external LFO signals if it had the inputs, but most of the time, no. So I've already broken my emulation rule, and I'm totally happy with that. The point I'm going here is, once you've done it, or let's just do it and save it. I guess we'll actually have two today. Let's go ahead and have two complete patches in one day. Who's gonna stop me? You? I didn't think so. All the way down to 40. So this one is called Minimoog because Father Moo made it. And this is it. Even with three LFOs, it's still pretty close to an emulation of a Moog. In other words, I haven't cheated too much just yet. But now I'm going to do it. Now I'm going to break it and say, okay, this is what my original synth sounded like. Let's get rid of this oscillator completely. What are we going to replace them with? An oscillator that only exists in the Nord Micro Modular. So if you were at home, I'm just going to turn on the volume for a sec here. If you were at home saying, okay, I'm using VCV Rack, I'm using some other software or even a hardware synth, and I've built my emulation of the Minimoog as close as my hardware can match it, even if that's not perfect, who cares? But the fun part here will be saying, yeah, now I'm going to take out the oscillator that's supposed to imitate a standard sawtooth, square, blah, 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 boring, old-timey oscillator, and use a completely new one. Of course, in Eurorack, there are so many that could fit this bill. Braids could do the job. What else could? Piston Honda is a wavetable one. There's so many of them. There's so many complex oscillators out there. You could take a Buchla-style oscillator and stick that in instead. There's no way that a Moog would ever have had a Buchla-style oscillator jammed into it, but you could do that. And all you have to do is make some of the connections again. Here, remember the pitch is coming out of the sequencer, so I got to send them to the new one and open this up all the way. And I already sent my audio signal to channel 1. Well, I've got a patch here, an input for spectral shape, which is not something, I guess you could say it's similar to this pulse width guy here, but it's not identical. But why not send him an LFO as well? This one is the one controlling the filter, so he's not controlling the other two, so we'll send him in here. Oh, well, I guess the bottom one is set to triangle wave, so it doesn't matter whether it's plugged in or not, but that's not really the point. So now with my new spectral oscillator being modulated and being sent into channel 1, let's see what we hear. It's still similar to our original sound. There's the spectral guy by himself. What if we feed him some noise? And then let the other oscillators back in. But you don't have to stop there. You can say, yeah, this oscillator also has to go. He's out of here. Let's put in another thing the Minimoog would never have had. Let's put in a formant oscillator. Again, a formant is an emulation of the human voice, so it's trying to make a sound like the human voice, but that's not what Bob and his synth were trying to do. Let's modulate his timbre. So in some ways you could say we're conceptually similar to a Minimoog. We haven't remapped all the cables here. We don't have anything, we still have white noise, we still have an oscillator from the original setup, but two of our oscillators that were quote-unquote traditional West Coast oscillators have been replaced with digital oscillators that do very different sounds, to put it mildly. Oh, and I should also maybe pitch this guy up an octave just because that's what we did the last time. Let them all have their own space to sing. You may find that the filter settings, since these are quite bright in the upper regions, we can use a tougher filter, 24 dB, to tame them a bit. But this is what I suggest people do. Without getting too crazy, what if I took the wave wrapper? We know this from the distortion factory. We're going to send the triangle wave into the wave wrapper. So our bass part of the signal is going to become distorted as I turn this up. And again, to keep it conceptually similar, feed him an LFO. You can definitely hear that in the bass line now, right? To me, it sounds, especially when the filter is almost closed, you can hear that distortion in the bass line. What if we dropped him another octave? Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that's probably too much because this one is already down. Okay, let's put him back. The point is, we took the concept of the Minimoog and we said, hey, here's what my synth can do. I wonder how that'll sound. If it's good or bad, or you like it or don't like it, don't come crying to me. It's your problem. You got to figure out how to make it sound pleasing to you. Everybody will have their own taste. These days, they say a lot of the hardware synths that come out are often described as very aggressive. And I would say putting a wave wrapper on a triangle wave is going to get you an aggressive, distorted sound. Whether that's something you like or not is a judgment call. But, yeah, one other thing you could do is I could take my favorite, the digitizer. I'm going to take the whole output and run it through him. It looked like I ended up not using that last mixer after all. Now I'm going to make a clocked random step generator. We're already getting into my techniques instead of the typical Moog techniques. And send that to the sample rate. So up here he's at full sample rate and full bit rate, but as I dial this in, you can hear the sample rate being occasionally reduced, and it's in time with the beat. So it gives you more of a rhythmic or percussive feel. So that's what we did here today, and this is what I was trying to... I don't really like to use the word teach in the stream because I don't see myself as that kind of guy. Father Moo is more of a spiritualist than a dogmatist type do-it-this-way kind of guy. I just want to show you what I do. But what I did was I built the typical synth. I built this guy, which I currently don't have the ability to afford, although you could get the Behringer one for cheap if you wanted. And after building it or emulating it as closely as I could, I broke it. I took the bits out that I thought were accurate and made them inaccurate. First, I added LFOs that didn't exist. Then I swapped out some oscillators. Then I threw in a distortion circuit. And finally, I put in a bit reducer at the end. So we're very, very far away from Minimoog. So that's why I saved this twice, is because I want to call this, I'm going to call this one 41. Not Minimoog. Or let's just call it not Mini, it probably won't fit. And it is a different synth. I believe so. I mean, yeah, there's no two ways about it. There's a different form of, a different pattern for sound synthesis. So it is different. It's distinctly different. And I went into this session knowing that I was going to do this, that I was going to build something, and that I was going to break something. But I didn't know exactly how it was going to sound or which bits were going to do what. Using the sine wave LFO is kind of a easy way out, you could say, but it was just a starting point to get the ideas flowing. And the final result, although it's a bit aggressive and digital and grungy, I think it has its own charm. So yeah, save this one in the synth. I gotta do the same with the other one later. But yeah, that's what I'm trying to explain here. Emulating synths is not only about saving yourself the money of buying a new one. It's also about swapping out the parts and saying, in this virtual universe, what if Bob Moog had said, I don't like these analog oscillators anymore. Let's make them digital and stick in a wave wrapper and a digitizer. If he had done that, if his brain had been taken over by the Borg or something, then we'd be in a different place today. Let's just go back for... number one, I want to save it in my synth, but I also want to hear the difference. Here's what we got now from Not Mini, and here's Minimoog. Same boring melody, but a very different sound. This one with a nice swept square wave. Let's save him in the synth too. So yeah, that's all I wanted to moo at you today. 2 patches for the price of 1, baby. We'll see you in church next time. Peace.